You are welcome to Scholars Universal Schools. Today we want to have our class in government. So the subject we are going to examine is government subject. Then the topic we are going to consider in this we want to look at bills. But before we go into the details of the bills, don't forget that in our previous class we actually discussed or we looked at the legislature as one of the organs of government, which we started with in our previous class. So there is no how we talk about legislature without talking about the bill, because that is a core responsibility or function of the legislature. So the bill is an instrument that the legislature work with in order to make laws for the better governance of our society. But let me quickly remind you what we did in our last class. We looked at the meaning of legislature, where we mentioned that the major function of legislature is what? Is to make law, and it comprises of the elected representative, and we have upper chamber and lower chamber in the National Assembly of Nigeria. Don't forget that. Then after that, we talk about the types of legislature. I think you can remember that. We talk about types of legislature, which is unicameral and bicameral legislature. Don't forget that. And we talk about the functions of the legislature as well. Yeah, I think you still remember that. But not to waste our time today, let us look at the bills. So let us look at the bills. Now, when we talk about the bills, yeah, I know if I should begin to ask you to give me examples examples of bills or what you understand by bills. I know some of you will definitely tell me electricity bill or other utility bills, but we are not talking about that in our class today. So when we talk about bill, we are talking about a proposed law that are to be passed by the legislators. Yeah. Then before we go into the meaning of the bill, so we want to take a critical look at the picture that we have here. So we have the picture of our legislators here in the National Assembly, and you can see we have our legislators here. As I'm scrolling the cursor, you can see legislators. So and as well legislators here. So can you see here seated? Then you can see our president here, President Muhammad Buhari, here presenting the bill before the House. Is here to defend the purpose of the bill. But this is a container that has the content of the leaflets of the bill that will be discussed by the legislators here. So you can see the diagram is this particular container contains the bills that will be looked into, that will be used to make a law for the better governance of the country. Now let us look at the meaning of a bill. Like I told you earlier, when we talk about a bill, so we are not talking about utility bills. We are not talking about water, electricity, and whatsoever bill. No. Take away your mind from that. So we are talking about the proposed law to be discussed and passed by the parliament in order to become a law. So we are just talking about a kind of document that is prepared by the executive or any other private member, which the bill contains the details of rules and regulations, or let me say policies that have not become laws, but are to be discussed, which will go through various stages or processes before it becomes a law. So therefore, we say a bill is a proposed law to be discussed and passed by the parliament in order to become a law. So for a bill to become a law, the head of state or the president must sign or assent to the bill. So after the bill had passed through the various processes or stages that it is expected to pass through, so the next thing is that the legislature will forward it to the president or the governor to assent, that is to sign the bill into law. So when we talk about the legislature or legislative houses, In Nigeria, for instance, we have National Assembly at the federal level, and as well we have state assembly in our various states as well. So if the bill is presented at the federal level, at the National Assembly, or at the state level, state assembly, so it's still going to pass through the same process. We are still talking about the same thing. So yeah, and you can see the diagram here. This is the diagram of our legislators. So this is a green carpet chamber, which is lower chamber here, where we have our representatives from different constituencies representing their locality, and here is the President Muhammad Buhari here to defend the purpose of the bill anyway. So then we have the bills here, and it could take any forms anyway, but this is the way it's just banded for discussion anyway. But as you can see it, so in the continuation of our lesson today, you still see other ways bill could be banded for discussion before the legislature. Then we now move further to the types of bill. So we have various types of bill. So here we have appropriation bill. The first one is the appropriation bill. So when we talk about the appropriation bill, it is a bill that deals with the total estimated revenue and expenditure of the government in a financial year. As you know that we cannot talk about political administration of any country without talking about money or finances, because they need money to run the government, to embark on developmental projects, and pay other recurrent expenditures. Are you getting it now? So they need to finance all these projects and make payments for all the recurrent expenditure. As well, they cannot just the president or the governor, which is the executive arm of government, cannot just put hands into the treasury of the state and begin to spend. No, they must follow the due procedure, and that has to do with what? Appropriation bill, which we are talking about here. So we said the appropriation bill deals with the total estimated revenue. That means the total amount of money that is budgeted for the revenue that is expecting from the income generated by the states. So there will be a particular prediction of the total amount of money that will be income to the states, and on that basis they prepare another estimated expenditure on the capital projects or capital expenses and recurrent expenses as well. So it is the revenue or the income that determines the amount to be spent on these expenditures. So before that could be done, there must be an appropriation bill to that effect, which must be presented before the legislature and must be passed to the law. Then another thing is the kind of bill and where the bill is originated from. So when we talk about appropriation bill, it is coming from the executive arm of government, either at the federal level or the state level. That is, the source of such bill is from the executive arm of government. Then let's look at the private members bill. Now, the private member bill comes from a member of the legislature. That means one of the legislators can bring such bill before the house, and such bill must address the issue affecting the constituencies or the senatorial districts which such a legislator is coming from, or that is over affecting the whole country as well. So when you look at the differences here between the appropriation bill and the private member bill, we now discover that from the angle of source, so it is the appropriation bill is coming from from the government, the executive arm of government, while that of private member bill is presented by the member of the legislature, that is the legislator. Then the purpose is another thing. For the purpose is another thing. So appropriation bill is for the purpose of estimated revenue and expenditure, while the private member bill is for is to address all other issues that are affecting the members of the public from different various constituencies. So it is not about the estimated revenue or expenditure. So take note of that as well. Then we have our diagram here or a picture here. So this picture is a picture of bills, the kind of private member bill here. So this is another way of binding the bill. So that is presented that we may be presented before the legislature here. So this is another good typical picture of the private member bill. So then let us move further. Then we have types of as we continue in the types of bill. The third one is public bill. This bill comes from the executive arm of government. The public bill comes from the executive arm of government as the source, and this with all matters or problems that are affecting the whole segment of the country. So that is, such bill takes care of the issues that is affecting every sector, every segment in the country as a whole. So that is the purpose of such bill, and don't forget it's from the executive arm of government, the president or the state governor. Then the other one is the money bill. This has to do with the specific projects. So the bill is formulated or designed for for specific projects in the country that the executive is intending to embark on, to spend some amount of money on. So the governor or the president, which is the executive arm of government, cannot just spend on any project just like that without presenting the money bill before the legislative house for thorough scrutiny or examination in order to become a law for such executive arm of government to embark on such a project. And this the picture or diagram you can see here, this particular diagram you can see here, it is a picture of a public bill here. So it's a picture of a public bill that you can see here. Then we now move to the other one, which is the stages of passing bill into law. So there are various stages that the bill will pass through before it becomes a law that will be enforced and used in the society. So we have various stages. So the first one is first reading stage. The second one is the second reading stage. The third one is the committee stage. The fourth one is the report stage. The fifth one is the third reading stage. Then the last one there is the assent stage. So we are going to look at the stages that I have just mentioned. We are going to look at them in total. Now, let's take the first reading stage. Let's take the first reading stage. So when we say the first reading stage, this stage is the stage where the bill, that is the proposed law, is presented to the clerk of the house. We have a clerk in the House of Representatives that is there as a permanent staff, is on permanent employment for the National Assembly. So is there to serve any legislator or any elected members of the legislature into the House of Assembly. But it does not, his own term is not based on tenure like we have in our democratic setting for our legislature. So it's a permanent staff. So when the bill is brought to the House of Assembly or National Assembly, so it will be presented before the clerk of the House, and the clerk of the House will notify the members of the Parliament about the presence of the bill, about the bill that has come to the legislators, to the legislative house. And this clerk also reads out the title of the bill to the legislators. And here the bill will now be printed into leaflets. So, and after that, it will be circulated or distributed among all the members of the house, that is the legislator, to study it. So this legislator will now study ahead for second reading, so that they will have the idea of the content of the bill, so that they can give meaningful contribution at the second reading stage. So now let us look at the second reading stage here. So this is the second reading stage. So at this second reading stage, the person that brought the bill, the president or the governor or the private member or a legislator that brought the bill, will now come to explain the purpose of the bill that has been brought to the house before the legislators. He defends the bill before them. He explains details of the functions that the bill is to serve in the country. So now let's look at the picture that we are having here. So look at this picture. This is the picture of the clerk of the house presenting the bill, expecting the sponsor of the bill, that is the governor or the president, to come and defend the bill before the what? Before the legislature. So the clerk of the house, and here we have the honorable members of the house. And this is a red chamber, that is the Senate here. We are having here before us here. So then let us proceed. We move to the other stages, which is committee stage. Now, after the second reading stage, the other stage is the committee stage. The other stage is what? The committee stage. So a committee will be inaugurated, will be set up to look into the bills or bill presented before the house. So the house will nominate a committee comprised of the members of the legislature that will form the committee with a chairman that will be head of that committee to look at the what? The bill. So they will look at the bill, they will look at the content of the bill that has been brought before the house. So they will make further study on it to see, to make some findings concerning the prospect of the bill. The recommendation will be made to that bill if there are any shortcomings. So this committee will examine the bill among themselves, and the committee we are talking about here comprises of all members of the comprises of the all members of the house that are being selected. But this committee depends. A committee could be selected to represent the whole house if that bill is to address important issues in the country, and the less important ones, a standing committee could be selected to that effect, but they are still going to perform the same functions there. So now we have the picture here. The picture you're having here is the picture of the red carpet chamber, which is the Senate here, trying to inaugurate or select people to represent, to people to form the committee at the committee stage. So members are trying to select people at the committee stage here. So, and when we talk about the committee stage, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President will also be the member of this committee stage. Then we now move further to see the other stage, which is report stage. So the report stage, at this stage, all the findings of the committee will be reported to the House. So this report will be subjected to the amendment, having made all necessary amendments to the shortcomings of the bill at the committee stage. So they will now report the amendments made and their shortcomings to the House. So the bill is
Good day, students. You are welcome once again into the class of government. Recall that our topic for today is still the bill in the House of Legislature, that is the Parliament, in the Parliament. Recall that we have discussed bill as the proposed law to be discussed for passage by the Parliament, that is the bill that has not been sponsored, that has not been turned to law. So that still need to be considered by the Parliament. Also recall that we have four types of bills, which are the Appropriation Bill, Private Bill, Public Bill, as well as the money bill. Now, recall that the appropriation bill is always sponsored by the executive, headed by the president in the presidential system of government, or the prime minister in the cabinet system of government. Recall also that this appropriation bill, it is what will necessarily be passed into budget for the year in consideration. Then we can recall that we have private bill, the private bill which is sponsored or which can be sponsored by a member of legislature, that is either a honorable in the House of Assembly or a senator in National Assembly, that's the Senate. So this we have private bill from each of them that could be sponsored if they have any. Then recall that we have the public bill, which is also always sponsored by the executive, which concern all matters that can affect the whole country or the whole state. Matters such as terrorism, matters such as probably the necessity for judicial reform or amendment of certain section in the constitution. So all these are part of the public bill that could be sponsored by the executive. Then you recall that we have what we call the money bill, which is actually focusing on some specific expenditure that are usually not specified in the budget most of the time. So, for example, we are in the era of COVID-19. You will agree with me that the expenditure being incurred now were not specified in the budget for the year 2020. So, the money being spent now is part of must have been passed through in form of bill through the legislative house, that is in Nigeria, the Senate, and the National House of Assembly. So the bills must have been passed through for the money that has been spent now to fight COVID-19 to have been spent. Else, so the executive will not have the right to spend such money. So in the case of pandemic, so the money bill can be passed. Then in the case of any other emergency, for example, if terrorism just crop up, so such can also be spent. That is, I mean, such bill can also be passed under money bill. So we also started the stages of passing a bill into law in the House of Legislature, that is in the Parliament. Recall that the first stage is what we call the reading stage. I mean, it's what we call the first reading stage. And at the first reading stage, recall that the clerk of the house, clerk of the house is not an elected officer, but is a public officer in the National Assembly. The clerk of the house will have to notify all members about a bill, the presence of a bill, and that the bill will be read out before all members of parliament. And after reading the bill to the parliament, a copy of the bill will be given to every member of the house. So like you have seen here, a bill is being brought, and so the bill will be discussed later as it's being brought. Then after the first reading stage, recall that we have the second reading stage, and that at this stage, the purpose of the bill will be expatiated. That is, the person who is sponsoring the bill, that the person who brought the bill will have to explain what is the bill all about, or what he hoped that should be achieved through the bill. Then we can also consider the stages in passing a bill into law, that is in the parliament at the committee stage. So after the first reading, which is just reading about the what's it called, about the bill, and giving the legislator a copy, the legislators copy of the bill. The second reading stage, where the bill will be read, and for understanding of everybody and for explanation, we have what we call the committee stage. In the National Assembly, whether the Senate or the lower house in Nigeria, so we have two types of committees. We have what we call the standing committee. For example, we can have standing committee for maybe for legal purposes, standing committee for medicals, standing committee for science and technology, and so on and so forth. So those one are there. But if the bill brought cannot be is out of the scope of any of this committee, that is, if it is broader than what any of this committee can actually work on, then the next thing will be that a committee of the whole house will have to be formed, and the committee of the whole house will involve the Senate president as well as the speaker of the house in the lower house in Nigeria. Recall that we are practicing bicameral legislation, whereby we have the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is called the Senate, while the lower house is called our House of Assembly. So the Speaker and the Senate will have to be among the committee of the whole house, and they will be the one to head the committee of the whole house in their respective jurisdiction. That is, in the National Assembly by the Speaker, in the House of Assembly by the Speaker, and in the Senate by the Senate President. So now, after this, the committee will consider the bill for amendment. Then the committee will actually work on it, on the bill, ensure that the necessary amendment is done, and then at the end of the day, vote for or against the bill to be passed. Then we now get to the report stage, whereby the report of the committee will be brought to the floor of the House. So we can see here the legislators seated here, they are waiting patiently to actually get the report of the committee, and to actually know what they should do. So the committee will actually deliver their report, and make the necessary amendments. So the necessary amendments, they have to report the necessary amendment or the adjustment they have made to the bill, so that every legislative member can actually understand what has occurred in the course of working on the bill. So then we now have what we call the third reading stage, which is the fifth step in the passage of a bill in the parliament. So at this third reading stage, this is where the legislators, that is the senators and our honorables, this is where they will finalize on the bill. This is where they will have to actually reconsider it thoroughly, point out any error if there's you point out errors if there's any, and they try as much as possible to correct such errors. And after doing all this, so the next thing is to ask for a vote in support or against. If you have been following the trend in Nigeria House of Parliament, you will recall that at a certain stage, when they are about to finalize on a bill, the Senate President or the Speaker of the House can just say that, okay, those who in support say A, or otherwise those who in support say nay. And at the end of the day, so they can just say, okay, the I have it. Sorry, you say those who in support say aye, those who are against say nay. And at the end of the day, if we have more people that say aye, then the Senate President say that the I have it, which means that they are in support. More people are in support. And where they say nay, it means that if they are not in support, and the bill will be placed aside. It will not be passed. Now, after this third reading stage, where the senators, the honorables, have actually placed their support either against or in support of the bill, then we have the presidential assent or the executive assent. The executive will need to place his assent. That is, when we say assent, that is his agreement that he has to sign it. The executive has to endorse the document to actually show that, okay, the president knows, or the executive, let me not use the president, because in presidential system of government we use president, and in cabinet system of government we have what we call the executive parliament, who is the prime minister usually. So let me use the word executive here, that the executive will pass his own assent, endorse it, and pass it into the law. That is, if and only if the legislators place their assent on the bill. If and only if the legislators actually support the bill. So if the legislators do not support the bill, if they had voted against the bill, then there won't be anything for the executive to pass the assent on. So it simply means that any law that has been passed in the National Assembly, that have been agreed upon in the National Assembly, so will now be passed to the president, so that the president can actually endorse it and ensure that it becomes a law. Also, take note of the fact that before the executive actually places its assent on the bill, whether the executive was the one that earlier sponsored the bill or not, so the executive will still need to read through the bill again to know if some salient things have been removed or added to the bill. You'll recall that around 2018 or so, you'll recall that probably 2018 or 19, you recall that the appropriation bill, which was supposed to be passed into budget, there were some kind of frictions in between the Senate as well as the executive then, that some things were removed and some things were added. So the the executive must have actually gone through the document before actually discovering that. So with this, we have come to the end of today's government, and I want you to go through these questions and solve them at home. So remain blessed as you wait for another session of government next week.